Welcome everyone to today's session on social mobility. It's part of a speaker series called Leveling the Playing Field, Lessons from Professional Services. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. If you could use the Q&A chat at the bottom, if you've got any questions that you want answered by our expert panelists, please use the Q&A tab, and we will filter those questions towards the end. My plan is to keep this session relatively short and keep it engaging, make it conversational. We've got a lot to get through, but I hope that we won't take up the full hour, and give some people some sort of 5 or 10 minutes back before their next meetings. Again, thank you everybody who's taken the time to join this. It's such an important issue, really close to our hearts at the Diversity Project. This is technically the second in a series that we'll have 5 or 6 more coming along the way, and we can show you here. Adriana has kindly pointed to the next slide, and we've got more sessions that are coming along down the way in terms of CIO roundtable, stay down talent progression, one for the commercial case for social mobility, one on apprenticeships, and one on ERG. So this one is really about what we can learn from professional services, and there's a huge amount that we can. They're taking a massive leadership in terms of overall kind of progress towards social mobility, and we've got 3 amazing speakers that I'll be introducing very shortly. I think just to sort of take a step back and think about why social mobility is important. There's a huge competition for talent out there, and we're increasingly, as an investment and savings industry, we're increasingly not only competing against each other in our kind of close-knit competitor set, but we're increasingly competing for talent around the world, and around different industries, whether it's technology and professional services and so on. So we really need to think about talent in I think in a more nuanced and deeper way, and social mobility is a key part of how we do that. The next slide, it just references a toolkit that we launched back in June on Social Mobility Day, which is officially the kind of first in this series of speaker series. And we launched a toolkit that's got an amazing array of resources and case studies for anyone who's looking to deepen their knowledge on social mobility, to find out where to start, to just, I guess, kind of further progress how their organization is tackling the issue. And there's tons and tons of resources, and there's a QR code at the end of this webinar that you'll be able to take, and it will take you straight to the toolkit. So I do recommend that you do that. I think it's probably time to introduce our speakers. So Jenny Baskerville, Head of Inclusion, Diversity and Equity at KPMG, and also a non-exec director at Progress Together. So wears 2 hats, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to tap into both of those hats today. KPMG, will surprise none of you, have taken a massive leadership in the area of social mobility. And we'll be looking to kind of glean some insights from Jenny on that front. And then the Progress Together part of her hat really focuses on, it's a spin out from the socioeconomic task force that the government set up. And there's a focus on progression, and we'll get into a lot more detail around the work, the great work that's being done by Progress Together. And then we've got Grace Osborne, previously of PwC, who took them to the top of the rankings in terms of the Social Mobility Index, which we'll get onto in a minute. And currently at Brown Jacobson, who are number 2 on the Social Mobility Index. And you know, so there's an amazing amount of insights that we can glean from Grace, and I look forward to getting into that now. And then Sarah Atkinson, without sort of further ado. I sometimes think of Sarah as the sort of fairy godmother of social mobility, but whenever I've got a question or a thought to try and better understand the issues that of the day that we're facing, Sarah's a massive fountain of knowledge. And if we just skip on to the next slide, we'll kind of understand a bit more about why. So the Social Mobility Foundation does a number of different things. They cover like student programs, campaigns, volunteering, and partnerships. But the main thing that one of the main things that they're kind of famous for is running a social mobility index, and it ranks employers. You can see here are a few stats that that we wanted to draw out. There's 143 organisations that entered the index. There's, I think, one of the interesting points that you can kind of see here is that only 37 organisations publish data on socioeconomic characteristics. That's quite a big gap when you think about how many people are entering the index and then how many people are, or how many organisations are actually collecting data. So, excuse me, we'll get into that in a bit more detail in as we come on. But Sarah Atkinson's the CEO of Social Mobility Foundation, and we'll give some more insights around the index itself and what we can learn from it. And I'll just skip on to the next slide, and then we can sort of see. This is why we're here, really. This is why we've got, the professional services. If you look at the top 10, it's massively dominated by law and professional services firms. So we want to try and glean as many insights as we can about how we can progress this agenda and make progress together, no pun intended. And then the next slide. This is a really helpful way. This is from the Social Mobility Index and the reports that they produce. This just helps, I think, ground everyone in terms of where they need to focus. So there's 8 areas that they look at when they're assessing companies. You've got schools, outreach and work with young people, recruitment and selection, data collection, culture and internal advocacy, attraction and university outreach, routes to the employer, pay and progression and retention, and then external advocacy. And all of these 8 themes, no doubt, will be touched on as we get into the questions. And I think with that, I'll probably open it up. So my first question, I was going to direct it to Sarah. Could you just elaborate a bit more on the Social Mobility Index that I've tried to kind of give an introduction to?
Certainly, thank you, James. What a lovely description as the fairy godmother of social mobility, much better than the wicked stepmother of social mobility, which probably some organisations can feel like we are. But yeah, as you've described, the index is about practical insights, actions, feedback and challenge on social mobility for employers. So we're trying to do a couple of things. For those of you who are at the start of your journey, we're trying to make sure you've got access to practical information and advice and tailored feedback about where you're at and where we think you should focus your efforts. And we're trying to make sure you've got access to insights from those who've gone ahead of you, as Grace and Jenny will talk about today, to learn from them so no one is reinventing the wheel. For those who are further advanced in their journey, like Brown Jacobson, KPMG, some of the professional services organisations we're talking about today, we're trying to encourage them to keep pushing, keep developing, break new ground, and ensure that they don't sit tight, because even if you lead the Social Mobility Index, you're not perfect when it comes to social mobility, and we've got improvements we can make. And then the other thing we're trying to do with the index is we're trying to share more broadly and raise a profile of employer-led social mobility so that we can build understanding, build insight, inform policymakers and decision makers about what's going on in employer-led social mobility. So if that makes you think, well, maybe we should be getting involved in this, we would like access to that kind of feedback and those kind of insights. We'll be publishing this year's index in just a few weeks, and we'll be opening up for 2025. So yeah, get ready and get in touch now.
Thank you, Sarah. If I just move to Jenny, excuse me. So for quite some time now, we've looked on in envy from the investment and savings industry, the professional services firms, and how many kind of, I guess, market leading initiatives, targets that you've put in place. Could you just talk us through, your journey, and I guess the things that stand out about how we can learn from you?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose in preparation for today, thank you firstly for the invitation to join. In preparation for today, I was just reflecting back on, I suppose, why professional services might have been seen as sort of an early mover in the space of social mobility. And there was a report that came out from Alan Milburn back in 2009 called the Panel on Fair Access to the Professions. And I remember sort of both the legal sector and the accountancy sector really sort of organising themselves to come together in response to this, because I suppose we felt the collective challenge was such that we needed to work more as a sector. And there were initiatives such as Prime and Access Accountancy that were developed around that time, and now we have progress together across the financial services. And I think ultimately it was recognising that we needed to do more. It was quite a damning report back at that time around the lack of socioeconomic diversity within our collective profession. If I then think about KPMG's, we went on to do a lot of work with government under the coalition, becoming one of the founding social mobility business compact champions. And we'd up until that point had quite an active voice on topics such as the living wage. We had extensive education outreach, but what we weren't yet doing was measuring socioeconomic diversity and really, I suppose, embedding it in the employee life cycle like we were other aspects of diversity. So we've really come on a journey. And if I just step back and think about what's been sort of what's worked well, so to speak, it's been absolutely engaging our leadership on this topic. I would say that we couldn't do any of what we've done without the support and ultimately the education and understanding of our leadership as to why this is absolutely imperative from a growth perspective and a business case. And we've used the data to help evidence that, both from a quantitative perspective, because we've been measuring that data since 2016, but also from a qualitative perspective. Sort of several years later, by developing our social mobility network, we've got this brilliant group of individuals who are our sort of sounding board as we're developing interventions, etc. So I think it's a combination of how you engage your leadership and how you engage your people on this journey to really ensure that you're ultimately developing the right interventions that, again, going to then have the impact that you want to have. You mentioned targets, and at KPMG, we've had other diversity targets for some time, and it was really important for me that we absolutely looked at socioeconomic diversity in the same way. So in 2022, we did share a target on socioeconomic diversity to 2030, looking at our partner representation. I know we'll come on to the topic of progression, but absolutely for us, it's about getting in and getting on, and hence having that target and really, I suppose, holding our leaders accountable for the progress we're making or not making was really key. And I'd just say using that data, both quant and qual, we've tried to turn those insights into action. So what are the things we need to do differently? And I know we'll come on to what are the most impactful interventions, or what have we seen work well or not so well over the years. But things like work allocation or, the introduction of mentoring or development programs, how do all of those show up both from a sense of belonging, but then having that direct impact on changing that representation at different levels? And I just lastly add that I suppose none of this can be done, as I started, without working in collaboration. We've absolutely lent upon, really benefited from working in partnership with other organisations, whether that's the likes of Social Mobility Foundation or the Bridge Group. Then also across our sector, it's really important to build a community because no one organisation has all the answers to this, as Sarah said. So it's really about how do we work together. And I really feel like KPMG has benefited as a result of having that partnership-led strategy. So I think it's about building that accountability through data, having sort of regular feedback loops, and then, communications ultimately as well to really engage your colleagues on the journey you're going on. But I'm sure we'll come into more detail later on the specifics. Hopefully that
Thank you,
gives a
Jane.
helpful
Yeah,
summary.
it does. Yeah, it's really good. Thank you. It's great to hear that. With Grace, I'd come to you now. Brown Jacobson will be familiar to some people at the Diversity Project. We had the great Tom Lias come in and speak at our Diversity Project annual conference a couple of years ago, and he told the story of how Brown Jacobson shot to what was #1 at that time. I know they're now #2. And you've since joined. You've obviously had experience at PwC as well and led many social mobility entries into the Social Mobility Index. So just be great to get your kind of take on I guess the story, and you can reference PwC and Brown Jacobson to whatever degree you think is necessary. But I'd love to hear a bit more from you now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, James. So yeah, I've been at Brown Jacobson since February. So a lot of this, I'm just going to be going off what Tom has told me. But yeah, we at Brown Jacobson, our social mobility journey kind of started really back in 2016. And that is when Tom joined, and he kind of had come from a retail background, very different to the legal sector, where, there is a historic reputation of elitism in the legal sector. And he kind of looked at our talent pipelines and thought, this doesn't, there's something wrong here, particularly around academic requirements. So we had 2-1, ABB, and we recruited from about 6 universities nationally, which didn't seem like a particularly diverse pot of people. So he immediately removed academic requirements. And I'll talk a little bit more about that story on the data, I think, a bit later. Needless to say, it didn't quite go down how we planned, and the organisation were a bit confused and worried about what the implications would be. But we started seeing diverse talent coming in, and we reformed that talent strategy to actually go, let's not recruit from 6 universities, let's go out to all the universities where there's amazing talent. And we started to see how that was going to benefit our diversity in our pipelines. And then came the moment where partners who perhaps weren't as bought into that strategy were seeing amazing talent come in, knowing that they never would have seen that if they hadn't have opened up academic requirements and opened up the talent pipelines across to different universities. And then a kind of another key moment in our story is about 2019. We looked at work experience. I think we were entering the index for the first time, and we had to report on where do our work experience students come from? And 96% had some sort of familial connection to the firm. So whether that was a parent or an aunt or an uncle or a family friend, every single one except for 4% had already a connection into the legal sector. So it wasn't like they were getting experience that they would have never have got. These were people who knew someone already, who knew exactly what an experience in the legal sector looked like. They just wanted a bit extra to add to their CV. So we started our initiative at that point called FAIR, which stands for Fairer Access into Real Experience. And that was, again, really looking at how do we diversify that work experience pot? How do we ensure that we're giving opportunities to people who don't know a single person who's a lawyer and may never come across a lawyer unless it was for the wrong reasons? So it was really trying to diversify that. And that's, as I said, the point at which we started entering the index. I think 2019, we were about 85, didn't even make it to the top 75. We were really, out of the running, so to speak. But using that experience, and I'd encourage anyone who hasn't even looked at the index submission just to sign up, go and have a look at what that questionnaire involves. You might want to give yourself some time to read through it. It's a long document, but what it does is go through absolutely every single aspect of your business and give you that point of reflection. And I think for us, that work experience program wouldn't exist if we hadn't had that moment of reflection to go, hang on here, something is really not right about what we're doing. And I think across the board of both organisations I've worked at, the index has kind of acted as that checklist. We didn't go from 85 to I think about 8 by just making it all up and giving it a go. We were using the index to go, actually, okay, our progression issues, do we have the data behind that? Can we actually say we know what's going on? Okay, let's look at our early talent pipeline. Do we have any idea if our talent strategy is working? Like using each bit as a checklist to go, right, let's see the next part. And that's where the index has been so useful to us, is to actually use it as a point of reflection for every single part of what we do in the employee life cycle. So then coming on to 2024, we hired a social mobility team. I think we were the first in the legal to do that. So we run a dedicated social mobility team within our, it sits within our recruitment function, but it works across all aspects of social mobility. So whether that's work experience through to our inclusion and diversity, through to our work with our clients, and our social value contracts, and all of that sits within the social mobility sphere. And that team kind of really gave our firm the opportunity to be like, this is where we're putting our money where our mouths are, really, to say, actually, we're going to employ people full time to look at this. It's not going to be a side project. I appreciate that is a resource that very few organisations are in the position to have at the moment, but it really does demonstrate to everyone in your organisation and your clients, like, this is something that's really important to us. It's not just a side project that we're trying to work on because it's a good thing to do. We see it as a core part of our business function. So that's been a really exciting development. And as a newbie to Brown Jacobson, I think that the most innovative thing that we're doing is probably our work with our clients. I was really kind of shocked and surprised how much work we do with our clients around social mobility. It's not just something we wait for them to talk to us about. It's something that we directly go to our clients and say, look, we're doing really well on this. Do you want to learn more? Do you want to like engage in this conversation? We can help you. And in doing so, that strengthens our relationships, but we also know we're creating that ripple effect. And I can give some great examples later on about kind of where we've seen that really come into play.
Thank you, Grace. Yeah, really interesting to hear all of that. And in particular, that point you were making about data, and, you know, not understanding whether you've got an issue. And that's clearly something that comes up time and time again, is the data question. And it's obviously a massive part of how we tackle this. I know we need to caveat that with, nobody can wait until they've got the perfect data, because if we do wait, then we're not going to make the interventions that we need, and yeah, we'll be waiting a long time. So there's a kind of balance to be had between how important data is, for us being able to understand the problem and then help solve it, but also not just kind of waiting for perfect data. But I guess I'd just be really interested to open that point up to everyone, and maybe try and weave in, I know Sarah's I've spoken to Sarah about this in the past around the international perspectives of data and the challenges around that. But if so, maybe Sarah, could I just go to you first to just reflect on the massive topic that is data, and then I'll go to Jenny and Grace as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, James. So yeah, I think when it comes to data, we already have plenty of evidence that socioeconomic background affects outcomes, and that's the case right across the workforce, right across professional jobs and careers, highly skilled careers, and that it's relevant in almost every sector of the economy. So you definitely don't need data to identify whether the finance sector, the investment sector, the professional services sector is experiencing that. I think Grace and Jenny have both given some really good examples of data connected to strategy can be really smart. Just sometimes you can use building the data to identify some of the kind of uncomfortable conversations you need to have. Does it feel right to us as an organisation that 96% of people have a familial connection to get work experience? If that doesn't feel right, that's a trigger for action. Similarly, the work I know that KPMG did around looking at socioeconomic background in progression really fueled the kind of, took KPMG from thinking we have really done great work on this because we've got a brilliant diverse pipeline coming in, to saying, okay, that's not going to work if our diverse pipeline can't stay and progress the way they should. So I think there's some really smart examples. I think also, and again, for anyone on this call who's at an earlier stage of thinking about this, the act of starting to collect data can be a really important way to build the conversation around social mobility in your organisation, because it's not a protected characteristic, because it's not always a requirement that people are used to give data about their background, and because it is personal, private information that someone has to trust you with. If your colleagues don't trust that that data is going to be used in the best way, if they don't trust that the organisation has got a plan to do the right things with it, frankly, if they think that telling the organisation about their socioeconomic background could make it even more the case that they can't be successful and progress, then your collection rates will be awful. And so setting an early target around collection and response rate and having the conversation to support that in the organisation can be a really good foundational element of strategy. So don't think about the data as the thing you need before you start the conversation, but think of the conversation needing to happen as part of collecting the data. Just quickly, James, you touched on the international point, and I know lots of the organisations involved in this call will be thinking how do I have a UK social mobility conversation with EMEA, the US, the different markets I'm involved in. I think there are increasingly good examples of firms operating with that kind of European global footprint who've been able to collect and manage their data really well. And I think the increasing coalescence around parental occupation as the best single measure we have, flawed in various aspects though it is, one of the good reasons for that is it is a measure that translates across different jurisdictions, different economies and different contexts, much better than perhaps some of the measures that we might use around parental education, for example, or type of school, which can be much more sector specific. So I think that people can take confidence both from the fact that we've got a good data measure that works across jurisdictions, and that there are organisations with global footprints who are able to do that and have got good examples and good systems that are working.
Thanks, Sarah. And Jenny, just around picking up on what Sarah was saying around some of the challenges of communicating and building trust with your employees to collect the data in the first place. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say we've absolutely been on a journey and learned along the way as to what has engaged our colleagues, and perhaps what is an important conversation, but has certainly shared colleagues sharing with us where they felt uncomfortable seeing some of the questions. It's really important to have sort of that dialogue. So very early on we started asking some questions on social mobility in sort of 2014-15, not yet the parental occupation question, and so we've really even evolved our data set over the years to then fine tune the parental occupation question as the one we talk about. And we've, from a communications point of view, we've tried to centre on what's going on at a macro level, as well as what does it mean for you as an individual, so people have the broader context as to why does this matter in the UK from an OECD perspective, all the way through to why might you as an individual feel compelled to share the data. As with any sort of data campaigns, we treat our data, I guess, as sensitive data. I know it isn't quite from a GDPR perspective, but we treat it as such, with the other ID related data. So we've got, all the GDPR kind of regulations around it, and then we're really clear in the campaigns that we run. It's under lock and key. This is why we need it. But telling the colleague stories as part of it to make it exciting, make it engaging. And we've done kind of over the years kind of FAQs, crib sheets. We've engaged our ambassadors and our network members to be the people out talking about it. We've had feedback from our network members as well as to how it might feel, because to your point, Sarah, some of the questions have felt over the years invasive. People might feel uncomfortable. We still have a very live discussion around how we frame socioeconomic background and whether working class terminology is how someone identifies or not. It's very personal. So I think it's about regular communications, embedding it with your broader campaign, but not being afraid to have that really open dialogue as to why this might feel uncomfortable, so that people really feel that they're being heard, and then really reinforcing the message as to how you protect the data and how it will be used, because that I think is a really important thing that people might worry or get concerned over. The last thing I'd add is that we did attach it to our HR profile quite early on, and that's been a game changer in us overlaying, I guess, it on the people processes. I know not everyone can do that, and I know there are system challenges with that, but it's certainly been something that I think has worked well at KPMG.
Thanks, Jenny. And then Grace, just in terms of when you've got the data or a reasonable sample sort of size, have you got any advice on how you slice it, how you look at it, how you analyze it? How have you approached that in your two different companies and roles?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I always think of it as like there is no limit to what you can do with it once you've got it. I mean, every single aspect of every part of our people processes, my job is to take a socioeconomic lens to it. So we've got a project at the moment looking at our onboarding processes. Well, I'm going to take those onboarding surveys, go and code it up with the socioeconomic data, obviously totally anonymized. And we use a kind of an anonymous identifier to then go and look and say, oh, it's so great that people are really responding to this, but those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are talking about having more diverse voices in the introduction of the business, or I think a really good data point I found, particularly from onboarding, was it was something like 96% of those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds had mentioned that they had a buddy in the onboarding survey. Now, we specifically give those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds a buddy, and it's nice to see that that the formal process is working, and it's not that there's informal things going on that we don't know about. So it not only gives us insights into what we should be doing, but also gives us insights into what we're doing is working, and it's really kind of improving social mobility. So yeah, I'd say like the sky is the limit. Any form of data that you collect, you can code up. I've become a real nerd about it, actually. And every single, people are like, oh, let's host a party. And I'm like, let's code it up for socioeconomic background. But, it really is something where you can actually really get to understand your business once you've got that data. And you don't have to have that data. I think that's another really key point. Everyone will be collecting lots of data about their business at all different points in times. If you've got that socioeconomic data and that parental occupation that you can code up, amazing. But actually, what if you collect a pulse survey once a year? Could you look at verbatims and see, is class mentioned at any point, or is social mobility mentioned at any point? Is work experience mentioned? Like, what terms can you use to look through your qualitative data? Or do you collect educational data? Can you look at what percentage of your business have got a 2-1 degree? Is that something that's, as part of your academic processes? Something that we did when we removed the academic requirement was, we had some pushback from the business, but Tom had the data to say, well, actually 20% of our partners don't have a 2-1 degree, so they couldn't get into the business if they tried, but yet they're the ones who are paid the most. So actually look at what other data you have if you don't feel you're at the point with your socioeconomic data where you can start doing that really clever analysis.
Thanks, Grace.
James, can I just really quickly jump in? Because one, I'm like Grace, absolutely love data. One thing I've found that over the years we've tried to also do is, once you have the data, is kind of validate that through the qualitative aspect as well, just because data can be really surprising, and yet whilst it might give you trend data over time, etc., you don't necessarily know what the experience is of those colleagues. So it is really important to then overlay any quant data with the qualitative, whether it's through focus groups or engagement with colleagues, to really test ultimately what it might be, what might be occurring within the workplace. And I'm sure a lot of colleagues will have some kind of engagement survey. And again, to Grace's point, those are really good examples of ways you can overlay the, ID data and therefore socioeconomic background as well, to understand that sense of belonging and the experience of colleagues. So it is really important to look at it, I think, on both sides. And it would be remiss of me not to say that Progress Together also can support, if you are not a member and want to join as a member on the data journey. All of our Progress Together members now do collect that data and are on kind of various stages of maturity, but it's it's part of the offering that we have at Progress Together.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thanks, James.
I'm just going to move to, we've had a couple of questions in actually, and I've skim read one of them, and it refers to the business case. So I'm just going to read it out. We wanted this to be interactive. So we want to make sure that we get to the questions that come in. So Grace alluded to the fact that most companies run initiatives as a side project. Guilty. With this in mind, what is the way to present the business case to leaders? Because you're already starting from a low base, whereby from their perspective, social mobility is not going to bring tangible income or clients to the business. So this is about the business case really, and how do you make that to senior leadership? Does anyone have a burning desire to jump in first?
I can go a little bit, because this is the area that I think we are doing really innovative and interesting things on. And actually, I was so surprised when I came in as to kind of how bought in leadership was to the social mobility issue, and that is partly because we do a lot of work with our clients on it, and the skeptic in me doesn't always want to say this, but actually, we win work on that basis. We are making money out of the fact that we are doing really well in social mobility. And whilst that is not the initial driver for what we do, it's a massive added benefit when at the end of the year our exec is looking at where might we cut back, where might we expand things. Well, if social mobility is bringing in money for us, then it's not something we're going to take a step back on. And a really good example is so we have a great partnership with the Welsh Government. They are a huge client for us, and they wanted to do more on social mobility. So they came to us to discuss what they could do. And we said, well, we've got this work experience program running in Cardiff, and we just love those students to get an experience of what the Welsh Government looks like. So now every 3 times a year when we run our work experience, our students in Cardiff come to us for 4 days, and they spend 1 day with the Welsh Government. They get a tour of the Welsh Government building, the Senedd. They get to meet lawyers across the Welsh Government departments. It's amazing for our work experience students because it really enriches their time. It's amazing for the Welsh Government because they're improving on their social mobility credentials, but it's also amazing for that client relationship because we are building a really close relationship, and we know when they come to tender, in a year's time, we're probably going to be the top of their list because they want to carry on that relationship because it's brought something really extra and enriching to that, despite the fact that it's actually nothing to do with how we are delivering on that specific work with our clients. So yeah, it genuinely really can have a benefit. As I said, the skeptic in me wants to say we only do it because it's really, really, really good for society, and it is. But it does genuinely build and strengthen client relationships if you can get it right.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we think about the business case in 2 ways at the Diversity Project. We think about the sort of mispricing of talent idea, and and that's not always easy to communicate to senior leaders, but I think there's building momentum around that kind of concept. And then also in our world, on RFP and tenders, it's increasingly becoming a kind of hygiene factor, whether it's just DE&I in general, and then social mobility as a part of what your kind of diversity, equity, inclusion commitments are.
James, can I?
Sarah
Yes.
or Jenny?
Oh, no,
yeah,
go.
I was
you
gonna.
go. You go.
Yeah,
Were you going to build on another
yeah.
question, James?
No, I was just going to ask if either you or Sarah had anything to add on this point.
Yeah,
you go,
I mean,
Jenny.
yeah, I'd echo Grace in terms of, this matters to a lot of our clients, and we get asked a lot around what we're doing, where we've what we've experienced, what's worked well, less well. We hosted a social media conference earlier this year, and we were sort of inundated with a range of clients and sectors, which is brilliant to see, because over the years, Sarah, you've always talked about the fact that new sectors are getting interested. There are some that are sort of, I guess, laggards and not yet there, but there was real cross section of attendees, and so it clearly does matter. And whilst I've absolutely got sort of leadership backing, there's across professional services in particular, you've got many leaders across the business when you're working in a partnership, so it's constantly how do you get in front of those individuals, and ultimately that client conversation is really key. But I'd also say the supply chain point that you just referenced there, James, is critical, but also regulators, and we're starting to see a lot more through the FCA, PRA kind of consultations. There's a lot more reference to socioeconomic diversity. Given the intersectional links that we've seen through a lot of the data, for me, this just feels like a really excellent way to kind of look holistically across your whole kind of DEI strategy and make sure that socioeconomic diversity is considered in and amongst all of that. So I think there's a couple of levers that probably could support that business case narrative, but hopefully moving before kind of the regulation comes down. But let's see with the new Labour administration what might come.
Well, we've got a question on that. Maybe later we'll talk about that. But Sarah, go.
Yeah, just one final quick point. So yeah, Grace and Jenny have talked about sort of regulatory and government interest and appetite, and particularly if you're contracting with the public sector, you're increasingly going to have to evidence this. We've talked about social background as an accelerator for your other EDI efforts, and that can be really powerful. Just the one final point to touch on is from a workforce productivity and engagement point of view, because remember, socioeconomic background it is a characteristic like any other. It isn't that you have no one in your organisation, there's underrepresentation, but you have a workforce from a lower socioeconomic background who the evidence suggests are likely to be less productive, less able to progress than their talent and capability permits. So if you aren't engaging from a retention and productivity perspective, there's a cost to that which you can save from good engagement. And again, you would expect me to say that because I'm passionate about this stuff, but there is good evidence from organisations, like KPMG, who, as Jenny says, very passionate about this, but also they're a business with a bottom line. They're not investing significantly in this just from niceness. They know there's a gain in being a better business and being a more productive business from this. So don't miss the retention and productivity point. That's a hidden cost probably, but is a cost to your business from your existing workforce.
Thank you, and you're making my life quite easy here, because the link now to Jenny and talking about progress together and this progression point, I think is perfect. It's a perfect segue. So yeah, talent and retention. We obviously know that it's expensive to hire people. So when we think about the fact that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds tend to progress 25% slower than their colleagues from higher socioeconomic backgrounds, could you just reflect on that, Jenny, wearing both of your hats, your KPMG and your progress together?
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, a number of you will have seen the Progress Together reports, and we had a Shaping Our Economy report last year. I can share links after as well if that's useful. We've actually got our next report coming out in only a couple of weeks. But similarly, KPMG's progression research that we did also in partnership with the Bridge Group found that colleagues from a lower socioeconomic background were taking 19% longer to progress. And because we'd actually done a similar study with the Bridge Group 5 years prior, there had been a small improvement. So it had gone from 22% to 19% on SEB, but we'd seen a reversal of the progression gap on both gender and ethnicity, which was really interesting. But when you then intersected SEB with gender and ethnicity, in particular Black heritage, you did see this sort of double, triple disadvantage. So, I've seen kind of our now chief exec, when he was on the Exco, have these like aha moments when you've got this data put in front of you in such a clear fashion. But also, as I was saying earlier, we've overlaid it with discussions, focus groups with our colleagues to really understand, well, what are the barriers that are meaning colleagues are taking that little bit longer to progress. What we found fascinating in our KPMG data was, whilst it took colleagues from A to B, longer, when they got to director, it was actually faster to get to partner if you were from a lower socioeconomic background, which points to the argument we all have around this brilliant talent pool and potential. And I think that's, ultimately whether it's taken them that little bit longer, or they feel much more comfortable in themselves at the point they get to director, and the potential is just kind of absolutely shining through. Whatever it is, we know these are hugely talented people that can get to the top of the organization. So it's really important to think about not just the wraparound maybe when they join an organization, but ultimately what are the systemic barriers that might be playing out within your organization. And I think we've made references occasionally on this seminar around work allocation. That massively is an important consideration in the world of professional services, i.e., if you get put on a project that allows you that ability to demonstrate, it might not be the sexiest of clients, but it might be risky, it might be high profile. And a lot of that is, through relationships you've built. And we're trying to kind of cut it at the point now with either technology or kind of the system itself, rather than just the individuals having to themselves work harder to get that profile. It's really about what are the systemic challenges of the way in which your organization is running that you can try and stop these sort of continuous practices happening. So I think it's really important we have a laser-like focus on how that middle management group continue to kind of progress to the top of the organization. We certainly at KPMG, we're quite public. We have absolutely a talent pipeline issue in the middle at the moment. So whilst we've set a public target to 2030 and our partners are, the most diverse grade, we've absolutely got a lower socioeconomic diversity at that middle management level. So it's what are the interventions we can do to support those colleagues to continue to thrive, because they've absolutely got the potential.
Thank you, Jenny. Right, I'm going to try and wrap things up in about 10 minutes, and we've got 2 questions, so potentially 5 minutes for each. The first one, Grace, I just wanted to ask you, it's about the protected characteristic point. So obviously Labour's manifesto had this in, and I think we're all got very excited. I haven't seen much in the way of news since then in terms of whether it's actually going to come in or not. I don't know if any of you three are kind of closer to that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on A, the likelihood of it becoming a protected characteristic, and B, why is this so important?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated, right? Social mobility is a complicated characteristic to define. The Government Equality Hub did the best measure they could with parental occupation, but it doesn't measure all the varied nuances that sit within someone's life experience, and particularly around poverty and access to resources. So it is a really complicated issue. I mean, the State of the Nation report from the Social Mobility Commission comes out today. So that will be really interesting to see how a new government has approached that. Obviously, they are arm's length, but will it have kind of the same messaging as it has done previously, which was quite positive around the social mobility story? Or will there be a kind of reversal on that? And I think that will really give us an insight into maybe kind of the trajectory. I mean, the protected characteristic issue, there are like pros and cons on both sides. In some ways, by it not being a protected characteristic, we're able to do some really creative things because we don't have to use data to justify it. The data kind of is there already, but we can have work experience programs that are solely dedicated to those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds without needing the data to justify that, as you would for a protected characteristic. As Jenny was talking about, it's not the same as special category data, so you can be a little bit looser with how you use and store that data. I think if they do bring it in, they've got to think really carefully about how that is written into the Equality Act. It would probably need to be asymmetric, so it means that only those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds would be protected. It wouldn't protect all classes as it would with, say, something like gender. It protects both men and women. That is quite a complicated process. So I think if it is coming, it's going to be slow. I don't have any insight. I feel like Sarah might have more than I do in her role, but yeah, I think it would be quite a slow process.
Yes, just on where we think things are, which is Grace said, not necessarily where we'd like them to be, but where we think things are. Enacting the public sector duty on socioeconomic background is something we're expecting really very soon. That's a simple regulatory change. As I alluded to earlier, anyone who contracts with the public sector, that will make a difference, or anyone who's dealing with public policy, but also we expect that to have a ripple effect in terms of the broader contracting environment. I think socioeconomic background reporting, either for specific sectors through action of regulators like financial regulators, I think is a short to medium term likelihood, and seeing a framework for socioeconomic background reporting, as we've had for ethnicity reporting as the precursor for that becoming a regulatory and legal requirement, I think that will come. Because socioeconomic background as a protected characteristic would rely on a review of the Equality Act, and there are other political reasons why that is a bit of a hot potato. I think that's likely to be a longer term issue, unless there is a reason, either a political or economic reason, why that gets brought forward. Because I think next time the Equality Act is looked at, I think it's inevitable that class and socioeconomic background, as well as other characteristics, are considered as part of that, because our view on equality has really changed. But I think when the lid is next lifted, socioeconomic background will definitely be in there, but there are quite a few political reasons why people might want to keep that lid on for a bit longer.
Thanks. And Jenny, just give you the opportunity to comment. You don't have to, but
I think, to be honest, Grace have covered it all, but I would only add that Progress Together absolutely kind of across its membership also kind of called on through the PRA and FCA consultation, we're sort of also asking from a regulatory point of view to mandate socioeconomic background reporting. And so I feel like there are other levers ultimately that we, I think Progress Together has ultimately said that they would like it to become a protected characteristic through conversations they've had with their members. But we wait and see. As Sarah says, the first thing that was referenced in the manifesto, and therefore what we expect is the reenaction of the public sector duty. So yeah, I think it's really important that we try and treat it in the same way if you can. I know, as Grace said, it does give you some additional flexibility that isn't a sensitive category data point, but ultimately it's certainly provided our colleagues comfort that we look at it in the same way, just in how we handle the data, etc. That was certainly something that I think colleagues felt meant that they trust where the data is going and how it's being used.
Great, thank you. So we're kind of getting into wrap up mode, and this final question is hopefully a good one. It's a little bit of a mean question, but if you could only do one initiative, or maybe what another way of phrasing it is, what's the most impactful kind of initiatives that you've seen in the social mobility space? I'll go for Grace first. 1 minute answers if you can.
I knew it was going to be me. If you could do one thing, I think look at early talent pipelines to start, because if you aren't, your pay gap, for example, is going to be zero if you haven't got anyone in your business from a lower socioeconomic background. So you have to start looking at what your early talent pipeline looks like to actually get people in from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So yeah, I would say start there. I think it's probably the easiest place to start. And then when your business starts seeing amazing people who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, who don't come from the universities they might expect or have the grades that they expect, but yet they perform just as well as anyone before them, then mindset starts to change.
Thank you. Jenny?
I would always say data, but I'm going to just put that there and not talk about it anymore because I know we've covered it a lot.
Yeah.
I think actually we took a little while to kind of see it come to fruition, but a social mobility network or some way in which you are engaging regularly with colleagues from a lower socioeconomic background is just, for me, ultimately really critical to understand kind of firsthand how it feels, sense of belonging, what the barriers are. That's been a real game changer for me in having that partnership with our kind of sponsors, co-chairs, and then the network themselves. I think it's really important to understand the experience of those from a lower socioeconomic background. And so, yeah, that's something that hopefully organisations can look to build, whether it's in a formal network or otherwise. Having that kind of relationship and focus group type approach would be useful.
Thank you. And Sarah?
So we always think about who gets in, who gets on, and belonging. Grace has talked about getting in, Jenny's talked about belonging, so I will pick up on who gets on and say any organisation of any size and capacity can critically address how do you progress in this organisation? What are the things you have to do to progress and be successful? And how do you find out about that? Because knowing the answer to that and then disseminating that information, which again can be something in a very small organisation that's very easy to do through conversation, or in a big organisation can require a structured programme, but that really tackles the extent to which things like sponsorship, work allocation, networks, relationships, which are absolutely part of the expectation for work, but can be really unseen and alien for people from underrepresented backgrounds. If you address that, then you're really looking at that piece about who gets on. So yeah, if you follow those 3 steps, you've got a who gets in, who gets on, and who belongs strategy. Happy days, you're on the way.
There you go. Sounds easy, doesn't it? But thank you to all 3 of you for joining the conversation today. It's been amazing to just I felt like a participant and just listening to all the insights. So I've learned a lot. I hope everyone who's joined the call has learned a lot. There'll be a recording of this that we'll be able to share as well. You've already been I guess notified of the State of the Nation report that's coming out today. I think that's something that we all wanted to go away and look at. Progress Together website. font of knowledge, loads of resources, Social Mobility Foundation and the Social Mobility Index, amazing resources there as well. And then, of course, be remiss of me not to mention our the Diversity Projects Toolkit, and also the rest of the speaker series that we've got running, where we cover from CIOs, how to set up an ERG, and how to think about apprenticeships. We didn't really talk that much about apprenticeships here, but we really want this speaker series to be practical, to be pragmatic, to help organisations understand how to deal with these and tackle these issues. So thank you everyone for tuning in. There's some QR codes there for access to our resources. And with that, I will end the webinar and just thank everyone again.